I grew up in Queensland, born a Queenslander, although I've lived in Sydney most of my life. I was born the youngest of 4 girls, so I had a really, really blessed childhood. I know I hate that word, #blessed, but I grew up about 20 minutes out of the city, but we grew up on property. So I had, 14 horses, 4 dogs, about 120 birds, and we really did have an idealistic, childhood. I started modelling with my sisters at about the age of 2. So my father was involved with a land development, and then through that, and our horses, they said, oh, can we find someone that can, model for this land development, and they need some horses. So, I was only 2, so that's when I started riding a horse. Believe it or not, I had to be held on there. But that's how we started modelling, and we started with June Daly Watkins at the age of 2. So a normal day for me would be getting up, going down and feeding the horses, and then after feeding the horses, you'd come up, get dressed for school, go to school, went to the little local Catholic school, and then to Loretto Convent, so a good convent girl. And then I'd come home of an afternoon, and if we didn't have a modelling campaign to shoot, because back then it was really different, like we were the only kids on June Daly's books, so we'd either be shooting a Maya catalogue or a Coca-Cola commercial, so it was really something on most days. And then weekends we'd be competing, so my sisters in horse events. So my sisters were really incredible. My eldest sister Joanne, we're all named after boys, by the way. So our names are Joe, Jack, Nick and Chris. So when my father obviously had another girl, he would always think of a boy's name, and when a girl came out, he'd just convert it. So Joseph, Joe became Joanne, Nicholas, Nick became Nicole, Jack became Jacqueline, and me, Christopher, became Kristen. So anyway, growing up was really, really fantastic because we always had each other. Because we lived a little bit further out of town, we always had people over on weekends. And my parents were these very, very young when they had us. I think they've been really lucky to do that because we benefited out of an exceptionally positive environment. And don't get me wrong, of course, my parents had arguments and, like any other household, but I think growing up, my mother was always, because we were modelling and earning our own money, she was always make sure we give back, and you've got to give out to other people, and she'd always say, put yourself in other people's shoes. So I think growing up, Mum and Dad were well ahead of their time. They really always taught us to think about other people. They also taught us about the power of positive thinking. One day I went for a role, my sister was going for a role for a movie, and she was 6 years older than me, so I was 6 and she was 12. Anyway, I just had to tag along with her. She didn't end up getting the 12-year-old role, I ended up getting the 6-year-old role. So I went away for 2 weeks to shoot this movie at age 6 with a chaperone. So I think, Mum and Dad were always like, well, be happy for each other's successes. My sister would never be jealous that I got that because, next time she got a Coca-Cola commercial that I didn't get. So I think growing up in our environment was amazing. So from that, I got to probably still modelling the whole time. 14 years of age, I did the Maya Imports parades. I was the youngest girl to ever walk with all the international models in the Escada parade. So that was a pretty big defining moment in my modelling career. Had to teach myself how to walk in high heels around the house, so that was fun. And then probably my next big moment in my career would have been, I started a children's show on Channel 10. So I had another host and I did that whilst being at school. Thankfully, Mum and Dad weren't, definitely weren't the pushy parents. They were almost like, you're not going to be allowed to do this show because it's going to interfere with your studies. And so the head nun at our school happened to be Sister Ann Kelly, whose brother was Paul Kelly and the Colour Girls, the famous band. So she was a very progressive nun. And she sort of said to my parents, I think this is another feather in Kristen's bow. We should allow her to do this as long as her grades didn't slip. So it was really, really cool. I got to film a television show while still being at school, while still keeping my grades up, so to speak, whatever they were. Then on finishing school, I was wanting to continue with my modelling career. And my parents said, you can't just be a model, you've got to have something else behind you. So I figured the easiest thing to do was a course which was property economics, to become a property valuer, because I could sort of jiggle that around my modelling whilst going overseas, and which I managed to do, and I was forever grateful for doing that. I'd always modelled to and from Sydney, so when I was 15, like Myers used to do parades all around the country, so you used to often travel between Brisbane and Sydney, and I'd often work down in Sydney. So I was quite used to Sydney and travelling, and so when Mum and Dad got a transfer when I was 18 years of age, I jumped at the opportunity to come down, and luckily I was able to continue my studies in property while still modelling. So it was always, you know, a juggle. I always realised, you know, my modelling career, I was never going to be, you know, with Ford in New York or grace the covers of, you know, Vogue or anything like that. So I always understood that I had a limited time.